Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Sorry, this is my first time live streaming on YouTube, so I'm making sure everything is working behind the scenes here. But welcome to the kickoff for Sea Otter Awareness Week. My name is Chanelle Hayson. I am the Director of Outreach and Community Relations for the Alaka Alliance, which you'll be learning a lot more about shortly. So Sea Otter Awareness Week occurs every year during the last full week of September and is organized in partnership with Sea Otter Savvy, Defenders of Wildlife, California State Parks, the Alaka Alliance, and the Monterey Bay Aquarium. This year is super special. It marks the 20th anniversary, and the theme is Path to Coexistence, celebrating the progression towards a positive relationship between people and sea otters. So thanks for joining us today on this beautiful Sunday. So this week also highlights Sea Otter Savvy's We Were Here Sea Otter program, which educates communities and stakeholders who are missing sea otters and offers a survey for community involvement. The Southern Sea Otter range is currently from Gaviota State Park to Año Nuevo State Park in the north. Sea otters did once inhabit all of the Pacific coast, and they are ecologically and very culturally significant. And there is increasing discussion regarding possible reintroduction to historical habitats, which you'll learn specifically about Oregon today. To move forward, government agencies and sea otter research community needs engagement from stakeholders to hear their perspectives. So if you're wondering what you can do, please take the Sea Otter survey and share your thoughts on possible reintroduction, because your voice really does matter. I will put those links in the chat so you can check that out, and we'll also reshare that link at the end of the webinar today. So I want to introduce Bob Bailey. He is the board president for the Alaka Alliance. Bob spent nearly 40 years in coastal and ocean planning and management for the state of Oregon. He also served as a city commissioner for the city of Oregon City and a member of the city of Salem's budget committee and the chair of the Oregon Wave Energy Trust. He has been leading the Alaka Alliance for the last several years to many amazing victories and achievements, and it's my pleasure to introduce him to you today. Take it away, Bob. And
thank you very much.
I knew I was going to forget this. If you have any questions for Bob throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A feature if you're following us on Zoom today, or if you are on YouTube, please use the chat and we will get to those questions at the end. Sorry, Bob, to cut you off there. Now you can take the floor.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there's a lot to do to introduce this session, and I'm thrilled, like you are, Chanelle, to kick off this Sea Otter Awareness Week, the 20th such event. We're going to talk now about sea otters and the road to restoration in Oregon. And I'm proud that we're able to contribute our experience to everyone and to what's going on with sea otters on a regional basis. So I'm going to walk through this morning, and actually it's now afternoon, and it's really great to be here as part of this. But we're not going to dwell a whole lot on sea otters per se. It's more about what the Alaka Alliance has been doing to drive this bus forward down the road to bringing them back. But I do want to start with just by saying that, oh gosh, there we go. I want to begin, though, by just having us all take a moment to consider this little animal that we're all so interested in. The animal who I think is the object of our interests, this little German Shepherd dog-sized creature that lives in the water. It goes about its life entirely in the water, leading, of course, to its scientific name, Anhydra lutris. It does everything in the water. It rarely comes out on land. And if you think about that for a moment, that's a pretty astounding fact about its life history. And let's really think back to its enormous impact on the marine environment, how it shapes our nearshore marine environment through its protection of the kelp forests, and all of that contributes to even to whales, seabirds, fish, invertebrates. The diversity and resilience is enabled by this little animal. And we're learning more about its impacts on coastal estuaries through its enabling of eelgrass that is the basis of the productivity within much of the estuary. Conversely, let's think about and consider the ecological consequences of its absence for more than a century along much of the Pacific coast, especially in light of climate change. And let us too consider the loss to indigenous people of a cultural relationship with these animals that began more than 10,000 years ago. In fact, sea otters were here to greet the people when they first came to North America. So now let us consider what it takes to return them to their former habitats in their ancient home on the Oregon coast. So let's talk a little bit about the Alaka Alliance. Alaka is a Clatsop Chinook Indian word for sea otter that found its way into the Chinook Jargon Dictionary, a trade language derived in the early 1800s that enabled the incoming whites, sea captains, explorers, fur traders, and various Indian tribes to communicate with each other. The Alaka Alliance was conceived and informally organized in the late 1990s by David Hatch, a member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. And you can read more about his story of how he tumbled to this idea that sea otters were missing, that their absence was profound, and that they ought to be returned to the coast. Dave passed away in 2016. A number of us who knew Dave and understood his mission began to talk with each other about moving that idea forward, and we agreed to formally organize as an Oregon nonprofit in 2018. Having done that, we raised a little money and worked to adopt a strategic plan in August of 2019, and we received our 501c3 status in 2020. So we're a relatively young organization as a formal entity. Our vision, as laid out in the strategic plan, is an Oregon coast 50 years from now where our children and grandchildren enjoy and benefit from a healthy sea otter population, a robust marine ecosystem, and a thriving coastal economy. So our mission is to then restore a healthy population of sea otters to the Oregon coast, and in the process, help make Oregon's marine ecosystem more robust and resilient. Yes, we're really thrilled that sea otters are cute and furry and that people like them, but the mission is to make Oregon's marine ecosystem more robust and resilient. Walk you through just a little bit of our strategic objectives laid out in our 2019 strategic plan. The first is to assess the scientific and economic feasibility of sea otter restoration. The second is to help the region reach consensus on restoration. And I would footnote that consensus does not necessarily mean unanimity. And then if we can do those two things, to proceed with restoration in carefully chosen places. So what this means in a practical sense is that we've had to develop a strategic, programmatic approach to our work. First, around science and science policy, to acquire, assemble, and present facts to accomplish a number of objectives. It means that we're working hard to build that consensus through communication and engagement. And it means we've had to build the organizational capacity to do all this, to achieve that consensus, to acquire and use that scientific information, to engage partners, to build the public and political support, raise the funds, and ensure accountability. Together, this is a programmatic approach, not merely just an advocacy, but building a program that can sustain over the years that are going to be necessary to get this job done. So let's take the first one, getting the science right, the first strategic objective. So what have we been doing? The principal thing I would say is that right off the bat, we realized in our strategic planning that we needed to develop a thorough feasibility study to assess whether or not this idea was even feasible. So a scope of work was created in early 2019, principally through a workshop in Seattle at the Seattle annual or biennial conference. The draft was published in 2021, out for review, and then the final was published in January of this year. You can read it and a summary of each chapter on our website. The team that put this together was really a world-class team, really blue ribbon. Dr. Tim Tinker was the lead author. The contributing authors include Mike Murray, Jan Hodder, Jim Estes, Jim Bodkin, and Sean Larson. We really could not ask for a better team of people to involve themselves in developing this feasibility study, and I was thrilled all of them agreed enthusiastically to jump in and work on this. So what's in the study? What did they produce? It's an extensive look, and including the history of prior sea otter translocations around the Pacific Rim and how those played out, the populations and demographics of how sea otters actually occupy areas and spread over time, how that the environment shapes the demographics and the population expansion. Sean Larson did a great job of looking at the genetics and history of Oregon's sea otters. That's become a key question as we consider whether or not northern or southern sea otters are appropriate for the Oregon coast. Jim Estes, of course, laid out an incredible chapter on ecosystem effects of sea otters. I commend it to you. Jan Hodder and Tim Tinker did a great job of sketching out the habitat suitability of the Oregon coast, and then describing socioeconomic considerations, the legal considerations, legal and regulatory framework is all sketched out in Chapter 8. Implementation and logistics, what's it actually going to take to bring these animals back, is Chapter 9. Dr. Mike did a great job of sketching out the animal health and welfare considerations, including some that we're going to hear about later today, really with Melissa Miller linking sea otters to pollution, land-based pollution. Those are the kinds of things we need to be considering. Chapter on stakeholder concerns and perspectives, and some overall conclusions. Contained in the appendix, though, is really a fabulous tool, and I'll get to that in just a second. The bottom line of the study is that reintroductions are, in fact, a successful conservation tool, and that reintroducing animals to Oregon is likely to succeed, basically, if we do it right with appropriate considerations. Estuaries may be an important reintroduction environment. This was not something we anticipated going into the feasibility study, but it popped up as being a key finding. The return of sea otters will, as we know, have many direct and many indirect effects, some of which can be predicted, some of which can't. And that social, economic, and regulatory issues must be considered. And that's really the focus of a lot of our work. In the appendix is an amazing population model that has helped us to refine a lot of our thinking about where sea otters should be introduced, could be introduced, where they might survive, how many animals, etc. This is a model that Tim Tinker and others have been developing over the years, and they have applied it to Oregon by dividing the Oregon coast into these segments. And for each segment, then is a variety of information that backs up the model, including the physical features and biological conditions of those cells. Also inside the model is how other translocations have played out, the patterns of how sea otters reoccupy areas, the actual ecological characteristics of sea otters, and their life history characteristics. Then you, as a user, and you can go online and do this, now you can put into this model factors such as how many animals, the male to female ratio, multiple or single release sites, etc. You run the model for how many years you want, 20, 25, 50, whatever. And out the other end comes a predicted population density after X number of years and by location. This is, like all models, it's not perfect, but it does give us a glimpse as to what's possible. You can see on the left, for instance, in this example simulation, if you put 40 animals in the water at a site down around Cape Blanco, the population is going to dip over time, but after about 10 years, start coming out of it. And by the end of 25 years, you may have 70 animals. Now, the gray area is the boundary of confidence. There may be a situation in which there are many more than 70. There may be situations in which there are fewer than 70. But the 95% confidence interval gives us a glimpse as to what's possible after 20, 25 or more years in various areas along the coast. So one of the things we did was to take the same introduction scenario of 100 animals and say 70 as an initial group, and then 3 per year over 10 years, and ran that same scenario for all segments on the coast. And what pops out at you is that there are a number of places that are actually turn out to be more suitable to sea otter success than others. Doesn't mean that sea otters won't occupy many of these other areas, but in terms of identifying the areas most suitable for translocation, these are the ones that pop out at us. We also did some site comparisons by saying, all right, let's take some of those sites and run a comparison of how many otters would you need to achieve a target population of 200 otters after 25 years. Well, as it turns out, Yaquina Bay, Otter Rock, you need 370 animals to eventually arrive at 200, versus down around Humbug Mountain, Cape Blanco, in the Port Orford area, you'd only need about 255. So this helps to demonstrate the difference between some of these sites in order to achieve a desired outcome. But it's only a model, and that model includes a great deal of uncertainty. All the scenarios show a population establishment period, as I mentioned, where the population will decline, sometimes precipitously, for a variety of reasons, before finally establishing itself and growing as a successful population capable of standing on its own. Not surprisingly, the choice of release sites is important to success. And based on what we know about the small home ranges and the limited movements of particularly female sea otters, particularly the mothers, the areas occupied will expand slowly. It's not as if there's suddenly going to be thousands of sea otters everywhere. And the last one is that multiple release locations may be more effective than a single site. Moving beyond then the feasibility study and taking cues from what's in it and what's not in it, there's a number of science projects on our to-do list. Some of them are underway. You see there with the blue check marks. There's some that have yet to be begun, but we're busy trying to raise some funding for some of these, but others we've been able to get going with what we have. We're committed to science education. We believe not just in doing these studies and the feasibility study and so on, but we want to inform people about what the science actually says. So from the get-go, we've been committed to doing a Sea Otter Science Symposium beginning in 2019, which was a one-day in-person event. And then, of course, COVID changed everything, and we jumped in 20 and 21 to spread that out in a virtual environment over 3 days. Later next month, we're going to do a one-day virtual science symposium entitled Thinking Globally and Acting Locally. I invite you all to stay tuned for that, and there's going to be some really interesting presentations, both at the global level as well as the local level. We also do a lot of science webinars and science in-person presentations that I'll talk about more in a minute. All of these presentations from all of these symposium and webinars are available for viewing as YouTube videos. So even if you're not a reader, you can go get basically the gist of what those papers have to say through the webinar experience. So in terms of communication and achieving consensus, outreach, and engagement, we've been doing a lot of things, and this is where Chanelle really comes in. We've been on, I'll just start at the top here with radio is a great medium at the local level. So we've begun to tap into that resource. Coos Bay, Newport, and Florence. Of course, Oregon Public Broadcasting and Jefferson Public Broadcasting covers all of Oregon, Southwest Washington, and down into Northern California as well. So that's become a really good way of expanding our reach. Print media, obviously, the magazines and newspapers, whether it's local newspapers or this statewide magazine or even the Atlantic Monthly, all are important as spreading the word, just building this backdrop of familiarity with who we are and what's going on. This summer, as Chanelle and we were really pleased to be involved in this great ephemeral art project on the beach with Josie Island, who many of you know. And Josie, if you're on the Zoom today, this was a fabulous event. This drone view looking down, you can see the people standing on the beach with the shadow from the morning sun cast on them. So you can get an idea of the scale of this to raise awareness of kelp and sea otters on the beach. We did a lot of in-person presentations before COVID, and now as we're coming out of COVID, we're starting to do them again. We like to do these because it really helps cement the personal relationships and build awareness as we try to make our presence known and build awareness of sea otters themselves. But we learned during COVID that webinars are really convenient, they're informative, they're inexpensive, and so we did a lot of them. Here are the cover pages for many of our webinars that we did. Some we generated and asked people to put them on. In other cases, people came to us and asked if they could do one. But this has turned out to be a really great way to spread our reach beyond just the Oregon coast or local communities. It's one thing to drive up and down the coast with a display in the back and a bunch of brochures and meet with 30 people at a time. And it's another thing to have several hundred people or pushing 1,000 people globally tuning into these webinars. In all of these, we like to emphasize and introduce sea otters to the public, and more than that, introduce what they do for the environment and their impact, particularly on kelp ecosystems. So as you can see here from this photo of Chanelle talking about kelp, this is really a key thing that we talk about. And not surprisingly, at least on the Oregon coast, people get it. They know about kelp, even if they're not a fisherman or they don't go out in the water, but they get it. So I think our message is resonating with folks at a local level. And of course, we also like to talk about the cultural significance of returning sea otters. and the significance of that return to Oregon's coastal Indian people. Pictured here is Peter Hatch, the son of Dave Hatch, who's on our board, a member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. He and Chanelle have just co-presented at some event. We've also participated in online events sponsored by others. This was a fun little one where we had some folks from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, way up in Alaska, and ourselves all on the same call on the same Zoom presentation. That was pretty fun. We've begun to reach out to and work with those who with concerns on the Oregon coast about the potential impact of bringing sea otters back. We've been discussing this with people from the seafood industry and the crabbers on the Oregon coast, including this webinar we held last summer of several speakers looking at will sea otters take a bite out of Dungeness. The answer seems to be basically no, but it doesn't mean there aren't continued concerns. So our website, and as you know, you don't exist in this world if you don't have a website. So our website establishes our global presence and is a gateway for a ton of information. It was our goal in setting this up to have the world's best, most thorough sea otter information website, and I think we've achieved that. So if you want to know about sea otters, ecosystems, all kinds of related topics, go to our website. Through the website, you can also find links to our audio resources. We've got more than a dozen podcasts with a number of personalities that you know and or have heard of. And this is a great way to get to know them and the work that they've done to contributing to the understanding of otters and ecosystems. Social media matters. It really does. As an old timer, I was not real optimistic that would make a big difference, but it's made a huge difference for us. Chanelle does a great job priming the pump using Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and keeping our YouTube channel populated. She sends out a newsletter once a month, and if you sign up on our website, you too can receive this. So as I mentioned, our YouTube channel contains a ton of resources, information resources. These are just some of them. The ones with the color with the yellow stripe down them, those are all from our individual speakers last year at our science symposium last fall. But there are probably close to 50 webinars that you can check out. The Oregon Zoo has become just a super partner with us and produced 2 short videos that you may have seen, but if you have not, I totally encourage you to go to our website and find the link to these 2 videos. They're both about 6 minutes long. One is on the cultural significance of Oregon sea otters, and the other is on the ecological and economic importance of sea otters. These are fabulous little videos and so well done. We had a tribal youth intern program this summer, the result of which was this terrific little traveling display that we'll be taking up and down the Oregon coast. And it talks about both sea otters and ecosystems, as well as their cultural meaning to coastal Indian people. It was a super project, and hats off to Grayson and Caitlin for the terrific job they did on designing and building out this display over the course of this past summer. Chanelle's done a great job of reaching out to a variety of artists who have been contributing their work to our cause, including Underdone Comics. And I love this style, and it helps us reach people in a way that normal science and more formal print materials just don't reach. So art is a great vehicle for us. We like to sell a little merchandise, raise a little money, spread some awareness. And if you haven't bought your t-shirt or your hat or a really nice sweatshirt, I encourage you to do so. You can do that online. One of the great things we did, because this is Oregon and why not, we held our first Oregon Otter Beer Challenge this last year. It came together, the culmination was in March at the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. We had a fabulous time, raised some nice money out of it from these 10, 12, 13 breweries, however many there are. And more to the point, we're going to do it again, another event, April 15th, this coming year of 2023. Put that on your calendar. And if you live in the area, make sure you buy your tickets early. And if you are flying in from out of town for this, make sure you buy your tickets early. We also get by with a little help from our friends. Kristen Plancart, known affectionately as K Passionate or KP, an marine mammal specialist, then with the Vancouver Aquarium, now with the Mystic Seaport Aquarium. She hosted a 24-hour fundraiser for us, and people from all over the planet chipped in. It was fabulous. She was exhausted and we were delighted, and it was just such a fun event and really helped build awareness literally around the globe. So going from the global to the local, our feasibility study, as you saw from that one graphic analyzing sea otter habitat up and down the coast, that study points to the Southern Oregon coast as being a region where most likely to be the site of sea otter translocation. We don't have direct sites picked out yet, but that's the region with the best habitat. And anybody who's from the coast or has driven the coast can understand that, given the rocky nature of the coastline and its kelp resources. So as we begin to think about these communities, we've hired a South Coast liaison. His name is Frank Burris. He was spent the previous 20 plus years as an extension sea grant agent. And his job is to be our eyes and ears in the community, to be our liaison in all that means, and help us really build a bottoms-up, community-based approach to our sea otter job. And I'm happy to say we now have our first executive director, Jane Beccari. Jane and I go back a ways. She once worked with me and for me for the state, and then she went on to other things. She has this broad, deep background in management and organizational experience, as well as a strong understanding of the natural resource issues on the Oregon coast. And I'm thrilled to have her as executive director. So funding, the Alaka Alliance needs fuel in the tank to get down the road. And I'm pleased to say that our financial picture is improving. It's pretty strong, it's pretty diverse. It's not where we need to be, but overall, I'm really pleased. And we treat every donation as important, whether it's a check from a child's birthday party, and that really did happen, to a larger foundation check or monthly donations. And I think all of us on the board feel a deep responsibility to honor the trust in us, people giving us their money to help us succeed in our mission. And so we've built a series of financial management structures to ensure that we're efficient and accountable. And still, though, down the road, it's going to get even more expensive as we think about and plan for bringing these animals back. This is not going to be an inexpensive operation. So here's a depiction of some of our collaborators, partners, and funders on this journey. As you can see, it's quite a mix. And this is not everybody. And this doesn't involve really the hundreds of individuals who we've reached out to pick their brain on various aspects of this. So this has been a fun journey, putting together everybody on the bus as we've gone off on this journey. And part of our journey is taking us now even out of Oregon at a more regional scale. As you know, and then there's going to be a presentation on this tomorrow evening at 6:30, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service completed a regional assessment of the reintroduction of sea otters to the Pacific coast. And so that's really stimulated a lot of discussion about the regional context of our mission. And we've increased our collaboration with Defenders of Wildlife, Sea Otter Savvy, Monterey Bay Aquarium, U.S. Fish, and others to really talk about how Oregon's effort, the Alaka Alliance, feeds into sea otter conservation and restoration at a larger regional scale. Right after Thanksgiving, we got a little glimpse into the future on the Oregon coast. This little sea otter guy showed up off of Yaquina Head, and conveniently, where BLM has their Yaquina Head Outstanding Natural Area and Visitor Center. And it was amazing the reception that this lone little animal received from the public. I went over one day to go see it, and the parking lot was packed. People from a number of states were there. Everybody was thrilled, and as you can see, with cameras and binoculars, pointing and looking and helping their children see it. It really touched me as a glimpse of the future of what it might mean to bring sea otters back to the Oregon coast. So the big questions are, so when are we going to get there, Dad? When will sea otters actually return? And I'm not going to answer just around the next corner, but I would just say that we have no deadline, and we will take the time needed to ensure that we get there successfully and safely. There's a long way to go, and some of the parts of our journey are not under our control. And by that, I mean building public reception and going through the regulatory approval process. But I would say that plus or minus 5 years is probably a reasonable time period to think about actually undertaking an expedition to put animals in the water somewhere on the Oregon coast. Could be longer, it could be shorter. I hope it's shorter, but if it's longer, that's just the way it's going to be. But we're working hard to make sure that it happens successfully, because our view is we only get one shot at this. So now that you've seen what we're doing and how we're doing it, at least a glimpse of that, I hope you consider joining us in our effort if you've not already done so. I firmly believe, and I believe the board agrees with me, that this is an historic effort. And so if you'd like to join us, go to our website, sign up and donate. And in doing so, I'd really encourage you to consider becoming a monthly supporter. That makes a big difference to us. So with that, I would take questions. You can submit them to Chanelle by chat, or there's one other way. But at any rate, Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bob. That was really wonderful. So yes, if you have any questions or comments or a good joke, whatever floats your boat, please use the Q&A feature or the chat. And then that goes the same if you're watching us live on YouTube as well. I have the chat up on there. Nobody's asking questions.
No question, no comment.
First ever in 2 years.
Even comments.
They're all well educated with that presentation. Nice work.
Okay. I would just want to do a shout out though to the Sea Otter Savvy team that put this together. And I'm especially interested in this, the coast float from Alaska to California. I'm definitely going to be joining that to see what happens. And the other one is because my wife and I are big Mariners baseball fans. We'll be watching closely the Mariners and the Athletics baseball game. And I hope that our guys the announcers give a shout out to Sea Otter Savvy.
Bob, there is a question.
Okay.
Wendy is wondering if you'll be bringing merch to Corvallis when you come to the museum at the end of the month.
Probably not. That's really an online thing, and we don't keep an inventory in Chanelle's closet to take to events. So you need to go online to do that. It's much easier.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for being patient as I flooded your chats with all the links as Bob was presenting. So you can find the link for our merch page on there, or just go to our website and you can find it. We will be getting some new Sea Otter art prints from a local artist, Emmy Syrup. So those will be going soon live on our website and at our tabling events. So speaking of that, as Bob said, tomorrow evening at 6:30, September 19th, we will be interviewing some representatives from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to talk about their feasibility assessment on reintroduction of sea otters on the West Coast. And then also on Tuesday, the 20th, I will be at the Oregon Zoo tabling with those U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reps as well. So come see me from 11 to 3 if you're in the Portland area. And then I'll also be tabling at the Oregon Coast Aquarium in Newport all day on Saturday, the 24th, to end Sea Otter Awareness Week with a fun bang right next to the sea otters there. Okay, we have another question from Fred. Have you identified a location where any stranded or injured otters in Oregon will be taken for rehab?
Not in an official sense, but here's what happens is that the Marine Mammal Stranding Network coordinator at the Hatfield Marine Science Center becomes the point of contact. Jim Rice becomes the point of contact for stranded animals. And then he can work with the Oregon Coast Aquarium if that's appropriate, or with local veterinarians, depending on where the animal is. But that's the drill, is the Marine Mammal Stranding Network number. And you can get that through the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife or Hatfield Marine Science Center.
Awesome. Okay, we have another question. Andrea said she's been reading a book about the sea otter reintroduction following the fur trade. How is this reintroduction going to be different from back then, which I assume is from the 1970s when we tried to reintroduce them in Oregon? And is it more well received?
Well, I don't know about more well received. In particular, the 1970 and 71 introduction in Oregon down in the Port Orford and Cape Arago areas was not well advertised. I mean, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, well, it was before U.S. Fish. It was the previous name for the federal agency. Alaska Fish and Game and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife basically showed up with animals and put them in the water. We didn't go through all the process that goes on today. This was really before the Marine Mammal Protection Act and before the Endangered Species Act. So that didn't happen. But the reception was actually fairly positive at the time from stories that I've heard. Our goal is to do a reintroduction that understands how previous and other reintroductions were done, and the reasons for their success and possibly the reasons for failure. And that includes the one on the Southern Oregon coast that did not succeed. A total of 93 animals were introduced over the course of 2 years. But after about 10 years, by 1981, all had vanished. Now we know that they had pups because surveys showed that several of them had pups, but the population dwindled and eventually winked out. We now think that based on what we know about the patterns of reintroduction that you could see from the graph, is that decline right off the bat can in some cases lead a population to zero out at the bottom. There's just simply not enough animals to survive over time and reestablish the population. So we think that that's partly what happened at Cape Blanco, Port Orford, and Cape Arago. Another aspect was the handling techniques were not as sophisticated. It was not as well understood now as to what you need to do to transport animals safely and effectively so that they're healthy when they get there. And then the last part was really just kind of the way that, because of some storm events, animals were released into the water. So we're trying to learn from that and look at the experience in other areas and how animals did survive as the model for what we're going to be doing.
Thanks, Bob. We have a question from a YouTube participant.
Yay.
You need between 30 and 100 animals for a successful reintroduction. Bob, where will these animals come from?
That's a great question. The most likely area is going to be somewhere in Southeast Alaska. The population of animals throughout that archipelago is 30,000 plus or minus. So there's a ton of animals in an area that we're capturing them it's never easy, but it might be a little easier because of the proximity to little ports. So they're likely to come from Southeast Alaska. The other attribute for these animals is that northern population is not listed as an endangered species. So that makes our job a little bit easier. Over time, we would probably supplement that population with animals we'd like to do this through the surrogate rearing program at the Monterey Bay Aquarium that would bring southern sea otters, a few individuals up to join their northern subspecies animals and help to reconnect that gene flow along the coast. But that's probably not an optimum to begin with because there simply aren't enough animals available, at least under current circumstances, to populate an area and have them survive that drop off.
Super. Okay. Let's see. We've got some more questions rolling in. Thank you, everyone. So also Andrea followed up with, she's read some things and watched some videos of controversy between fishing resources being shared between otters and the fishing industry. Is that a current issue or is that getting phased out over time?
Yeah, the whole question of interaction between sea otters and fisheries comes up a lot. There's all kinds of stories out of Southeast Alaska about what's happening as sea otters have spread throughout that archipelago and how they've impacted a variety of shell fisheries. Fin fisheries are never going to have to worry about this. In fact, fin fisheries will benefit from a healthier, more productive habitat. There are some areas in Southeast Alaska where sea otters clearly have an impact on crab resources, clams, sea cucumbers, and other shellfish. On the other hand, the Oregon coast is not Southeast Alaska. We have very different fisheries, and the fishery of principal concern on the Oregon coast is Dungeness crabbing, although there are a few sea urchin divers, red sea urchin guys out of Port Orford that may be affected. So we're trying to zero in locally to understand where sea otters would be likely to be within that regional area and where the current patterns of Dungeness crab fisheries might overlap with sea otter presence. So it's, even though we say or we hear about impacts with fisheries, it's really the shell fisheries and Dungeness crabbing that we're most interested in resolving that conflict. And we believe that a lot of that can be resolved at the site-specific level.
So when sea otters are reintroduced, will there be people monitoring and if necessary, rescuing sea otters in various Oregon locations?
That's our goal. That's all part of a translocation plan that we have yet to put together, but that's absolutely going to be the case. Monitoring is going to be key. And if necessary, capturing them, whether they've become injured or they're sick or whatever, we're not going to be capturing them to move them around. That's not going to allow it under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. But if they're sick or injured, certainly we'll be intervening. But monitoring is key. Yes.
So citizen scientists, that's where you come into play. We'll need your eyes out on the waters in the next several years when sea otters get reintroduced.
And we expect that if there is a population of animals along the coast, they are going to be so really popular and watched by many, many people that that's apart from scientific monitoring, that citizen monitoring will be a very important feature.
Okay, we have one more question. Can you talk about the condition of kelp forests off the Oregon coast at the present time?
Yes, thank you. Good question. It varies. It varies about by area that you're talking about. There's been an alarming expansion of urchin barrens and loss of kelp forest in the Port Orford, Cape Blanco, Orford Reef region, as well as some other areas, Pacific City, Cape Lookout, etc. But other areas, such as around Rogue Reef near the mouth of the Rogue River, and at Cape Arago near Coos Bay, those kelp beds are pretty much intact. So it really varies by location, and nobody's sure really why that is, other than the fact that kelp forests in Oregon, bull kelp, vary widely annually. Historic surveys show that the amount of kelp forest can vary depending on the year, ocean conditions, and so on. But the spread of urchin barrens, as I said, around Cape Blanco, Port Orford, down to even around Redfish Rocks, has become quite alarming.
So along that same line, can you also talk about the condition of eelgrass estuary habitats in Oregon?
There are people that know a lot more about that than me, but but the studies I've seen and the presentations I've seen, eelgrass has declined markedly in Oregon's estuaries in the last decade or two. There are probably some complex reasons for that. Among them are sedimentation coming downstream from watersheds, from watershed activities. And ocean conditions may have something to do with it. But yes, eelgrass conditions and the expanse of eelgrass is the subject of a great deal of interest to a variety of entities. Oregon Coast, Coastal Management Program, Nature Conservancy has taken a hard look at that. The Pew Trust people are looking at it. Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, trying to get our arms around it. It's our view that putting sea otters back in the mix is going to be beneficial to eelgrass.
Yeah, and if you want to learn more about eelgrass and sea otter recovery, there is going to be a presentation by Aaron Foster on Saturday, which is listed on the Sea Otter Awareness Week Defenders page that I put in the chat. And they'll go over everything eelgrass. It's a great question. Thank you.
That's such a valuable habitat, and the relationship between it and sea otters was not well understood until Brent Hughes came along and figured out that in Elkhorn Slough that sea otters were the reason why the water quality in Elkhorn Slough was increasing and improving, even though it's a highly the receiver of a highly polluted stream of water coming down out of the Salinas Valley. So that's something that we're just now beginning to really understand.
Okay, we have another question. So after initial reintroduction, if some of the otters that are rescued are deemed non-releasable for whatever reason, would you have a predetermined contingency plan for placement in human care or local places they could be moved to?
Yes. Yeah, we will have to nail all that down. And that's where we will be needing to mobilize not just the Oregon Coast Aquarium, but potentially local facilities, local veterinarians, Monterey Bay, Seaside Aquarium, Seattle Aquarium, other facilities that we can mobilize to do that job. But yeah, we've got to have that nailed down.
Yes, and the Oregon Coast Aquarium is in the process of building a brand new rehabilitation center on site for marine mammals and seabirds. and also for turtles. So hopefully that will be the hub if sea otters were to wash ashore and needed any sort of medical assistance. Wendy and Jeff said that there will be a presentation on the 20th at 4 p.m. on crabbing and otters if you're more interested on that topic, which is really great.
Yep.
Okay. Any more last minute questions? I have one final pitch before we leave.
Tuesday the 20th.
Tuesday. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so one last time, just wanted to say sea otters, like other fish and wildlife in the United States, are held in public trust. So this means the government manages and protects these resources to benefit the public, and those discussing potential sea otter reintroduction to historical habitats need to hear from you. All of your voices and opinions matter. So I just put in the link in the chat again one more time for the stakeholder survey. And you can also visit Sea Otter Savvy for more information. So yeah, if you have any other questions, you can message Bob or I on any of our social media or through our website. You can email info@alakaalliance.org and we will find it. And thank you so much for spending your weekend with us and kicking off Sea Otter Awareness Week. We're really excited to participate with all the other wonderful organizations that are involved. And we hope you learned something new today and learn a lot more about sea otters and hopefully more potential reintroductions here on the West Coast.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my cat is walking along my desk. Okay. Hi, Benny. He's now known on YouTube forever. All right. Thanks, Bob.
You bet.
Let me see how to stop sharing on YouTube.